Hello, my name is Tara Von Slaven. I am a graduate student certified in human sexuality, working on a master's in the field, and I think we should talk about the differences between sex and gender expression and sexual orientation. As I often do, I'm going to make some obnoxious pre-video qualifications about technical stuff. Did I decide I wanted to reframe my videos in a way that would reflect how I normally sit, how a chat with me would generally go, like we're sitting on a couch together. Yeah. And then when I reframed the video and realized the lighting was a disaster because all of my natural lighting sources are back here and I only have a ring light, did I then go, you know what, I have to accept the limitations of my environment, of my of the tools that I have, of my technical abilities. No, I doubled down. I moved a bunch of furniture around to bring in other light sources that did absolutely nothing. I have probably made some bad adjustments on the video recording, and I will probably also have to make some editing choices when it comes to the lighting in this video. But listen, don't you feel like we're just hanging out now? Isn't that fun? Probably not. Listen, nobody's allowed to complain unless they also want to Venmo me for a lighting setup. I'll link it if you want. Anyway, so sex and gender and the ways we dress and the people we're attracted to, while interrelated, obviously, being aspects of ourselves, are distinct dimensions of our identity. But the way we talk about them a lot of times sort of confuses them and convolutes them and equates them in ways that aren't necessarily true or accurate. So let's unconfuse them. Let's break it all down. Let's start with sex, not the act, but the biological marker, I suppose. Sex and gender are not the same thing. And that's not me being a woke, liberal, queer millennial. That's just a fact. Sex describes our physical characteristics when it comes to our chromosomal level, our hormonal expression, and our physical manifestations of those, i.e. genitalia and secondary sex characteristics like breasts and beards. Hey, breasts and beards are both secondary sex characteristics. So isn't it weird how women's breasts are so heavily sexualized and controlled and censored and beards are not? Weird, huh? I mean, at least breasts serve a purpose. So your sex is the science side of the sex v gender debate. But when you hear someone say, there's biologically only two sexes, right? You're either a man or a woman. They're working with a pretty limited understanding of biology and sex. I mean, that's on our education system, right? But that is a very middle school understanding of chromosomes and hormones and bodies. So let's start with chromosomes. They come first. There are 11 distinct, well-documented chromosome configurations that a person can have, and a lot of them are very common. So here's a few other variations of the allosome configurations. Allosomes are the sex-determining chromosomes that you could potentially have. So we have trisomy variations. That's 3 allosomes. That's XXX, XXY, XYY. This is the second most common variation you have after, your standard XX, XY. Then we have tetrasomy variations. That's 4. I'll put them on screen because I'm bad at math. Then we have pentasomy variations. Those are 5. Those are a lot more rare, but they happen. Then we have the monosomy variation, which is when there's actually just one allosome involved. So there's only one way for this to manifest, just because we receive the X chromosome through our mothers, the ones doing all the work, right? So the monosomy variation you can have is just a single X chromosome. We call this Turner's syndrome. I'm not a geneticist, so I'm not going to go into too much detail into how these variations are formed beyond it is something that occurs in the process of cellular division. And now I'm having flashbacks to AP biology exams. But as you've seen, that's 11 different chromosome variations that you can be born with. And there are different likelihoods of you having those chromosome variations, but it's more than just XX and XY. These chromosome variations then inform the other aspects of your sex, i.e. your hormonal expression and your physical characteristics, usually genitalia. In science terms, most of the people who fall under these chromosome variations are labeled as intersex, but you can be an intersex person without having a chromosomal variation. For example, congenital adrenal hyperplasia is a condition that affects people with XX chromosomes, but still gives them intersex traits because it impacts your adrenal gland, which produces hormones. This often results in lower voices, increased body hair, higher muscle mass, typically masculine traits, but on a biologically female body. Some intersex traits are noticeable from birth. Some you may not notice until you hit puberty. Some may not be noticed until or if they impact your fertility, while other people may be technically intersex and never have any idea because they don't have any visible intersex traits, or it might not impact their life at all. There are over 30 different variations of how being intersex can manifest and how it may impact your life. For example, Turner syndrome, which was that monosomy variation, the singular X chromosome, can cause physical trait variations like being slightly shorter in stature, maybe developing sexually slower, like later onset puberty, having a higher pitched voice, potentially some risk factors like higher blood pressure or higher cholesterol, and it can impact your fertility. But 90% of people who have Turner syndrome have completely normal lives and lifespans. Some intersex conditions do involve a sort of mismatch of anatomy, like having male typical anatomy internally but female typical anatomy externally. Conditions like this generally aren't noticed until puberty, when maybe you aren't having a period or things like that. Being intersex is a normal biological event. It's a normal variation, and it's not just humans who have intersex variations. It's evident in lots of animals. Some animals are by design intersex. The statistics we have now show that about 17 out of every 1,000 births involve some degree of being intersex, which is the same statistical ratio as number of people with red hair. But as I mentioned earlier, there may be more people who are intersex than we know, because unless it's impacting your life, why would you get tested, you know? Traditionally, babies born with intersex genitalia have been subject to gender assignment surgery right after birth. A lot of parents feel pressured by doctors to assign their child genitalia in order to preempt any sort of psychological distress that they feel their child might experience later in life. Some intersex babies do require medical intervention at birth when it impacts something like their ability to urinate, for example. However, most intersex babies are born completely healthy, and that would make surgical intervention completely unnecessary. Many adults whose parents consented for them to sex assignment surgery as an infant have spoken out about it later in life. Some felt that the sex assigned to them, usually based on whatever surgery is easiest for the doctor to do, didn't match their gender as it formed, while some have had severe medical complications related to early sex assignment surgery that have impacted their sexual functioning or their fertility options. 3 U.S. Surgeons General, the UN, the World Health Organization, Physicians for Human Rights Organization, the American Academy of Family Physicians, Human Rights Watch, and Amnesty International have all now publicly condemned these medically unnecessary surgeries for intersex children. Now, this doesn't mean that we're anti-surgery for intersex people. It's about bodily autonomy. It's about making the choice for your own body and not someone else making that choice for you, even if, as most parents do, they are making the choice out of love. So sex is clearly so much more complex than just what's between our legs, but what is gender then? Why is gender different than sex? A lot of people use the words gender and sex interchangeably, but sex is how our bodies exist, while gender is how we exist, who we are to ourselves. And who we are is influenced by the culture around us. What makes something masculine versus something else being feminine is socially constructed. Characteristics like strength or gentleness are often defined as masculine or feminine, respectively, but these are characteristics that individuals hold in tandem. Gender is set up in our culture as this dichotomy of man or woman, male or female. Just as a side note on the word female, don't use female when you mean woman. Female is not only an adjective and not a noun, but calling someone a female is such like a misogynistic dog whistle. Like, if you call someone a female, you say females do such and such, like, I automatically know you're kind of a douchebag. Anyway, a completely binary understanding of gender is a result of the process of colonization and these hierarchical gender structures. Most cultures pre-European colonization had more than 2 genders and had understandings of gender that were much more complex than a binary of male or female. The term cisgender, which you've probably heard before, maybe abbreviated as just cis, i.e. cishet, cisgender, heterosexual. These are descriptors of a person. Cisgender just means that your understanding of who you are, your gender, aligns with how you were assigned at birth based on your anatomy. As we've just discussed, sex is more complicated than just your genitalia, but for the most part, being cisgender means that your gender aligns with your physical sex. For example, a cisgender man is someone who was assigned male at birth, who has the typical male anatomy, penis, testicles, etc. And also feels like a man, who aligns with our general cultural understandings of what it is to be a man, which are complex and complicated, and there's a lot going on there. But our understanding of our gender develops very young, and it is not entirely socially constructed. We do have an innate understanding of our gender, and this is where transgender identities come from. Someone who is transgender is someone whose gender identity, someone whose understanding of themselves does not align with the way they were assigned at birth. Transgender often is used as sort of an umbrella term for anything that isn't cisgender. So this encompasses people who are gender fluid, meaning they feel that their identity shifts between being masculine or feminine, or non-binary or agender, meaning that they don't align with the ideas of masculinity or femininity, that they are separate from that. Or someone who is maybe assigned male at birth, but has always understood their identity as being that of a girl or a woman. Or vice versa, someone who was born with typically female anatomy, but identifies as a man, who understands himself as a man. There are tons of ways to visualize the spectrum of gender, but it's obviously much more than just point A and point B. There is space between those and outside of them and all around them. It's important to note that while plenty of people don't align with our cultural stereotypes about masculinity and femininity, some find this space much more uncomfortable than others, or much more restricting. This discomfort with the disparity between how someone may feel or understand themselves versus how the outside world sees them and understands them is what leads people to transition their outward expression of themselves through either gender expressions like the way they dress, the language they use around themselves, or things like medical transitioning, which is where you go on to hormone therapies or sex affirmation surgeries that align your outsides with who you feel you are on the inside. But you don't need to actively transition in order to be considered transgender. I saw an incredible TikTok the other day from this fabulous non-binary drag artist named Gloria Swansong, where they really eloquently sum it all up, and I will link that below. But one of the things they noted is that a lot of people assume that the trans in transgender is an abbreviation of the word transition. But in reality, it is not about transitioning, it is about experiencing gender transverse to our cultural understandings of gender. Gender expression is very closely related to gender, but it is not a one-for-one correlation to gender. Someone may be assigned male at birth, may identify as a man, but still want to play around with the way they express themselves through things that are stereotypically feminine, whether it be makeup, clothes, hair, color, jewelry, anything like that. The ways we express gender are also socially constructed and change along with our culture. Things we now consider feminine, high heels, the color pink, skirts, were originally associated with hypermasculinity. High heels were about making yourself taller, an attribute that is still associated with masculinity. The color pink was originally a boy color, as it is light red, and red is considered a masculine color. Skirts still make more sense for male anatomy than they do for female anatomy, and I mean, the Scots get that, right? Kilts are a great idea. Clothes that were traditionally exclusively menswear are now everyday attire for women, like jeans, pants, suits. I mean, I regularly dress like a 12-year-old boy, but society's roots in misogyny still impact our perception of gender expression. Women expressing themselves through masculine clothing is very much accepted and often praised, while men expressing themselves in ways that are typically feminine is often criticized. I mean, there was fucking outrage when Harry Styles wore a dress on the cover of Vogue, but that's nothing new. I mean, artists like Prince and David Bowie were known for their gender-bending style, but it was always divisive. Whereas Diane Keaton and Annie Hall is considered a style icon, and she very much is, absolutely. Sick outfits. But embracing masculinity is very rarely met with a sort of vitriol that men embracing femininity is. Even cisgender women embracing femininity is often seen very critically. Hyperfeminine women are often seen as unintelligent or submissive or incapable, despite leaning into the very gender expression that society has created. A whole movement towards embracing hyperfemininity has evolved as this sort of counterculture response to the ways in which our bodies and our gender expression are often controlled and criticized. Gender expression is also often used as a means of identifying someone's sexual orientation, but this is once again not a one-to-one correlation. Many people who identify as LGBTQIA+ do find the freedom to express themselves in ways that are outside of heteronormativity and binary understandings of gender. But what someone wears is not the same as who someone is attracted to. LGBTQIA+ is a mouthful, admittedly, so let's break that down. L is for the way you, lesbian, me. O is for the only lesbians I see. L is for lesbian. Lesbians are women who are attracted to other women. Obviously, sex, gender, we've just discussed this, are much more complex than that, but we're just stripping these down to the very basics of the definitions, right? So, lesbians are women attracted to other women. G is for gay. Gay is often used as an umbrella term, but typically means men attracted to other men. B is for bisexual. Bisexual has become a bit of a controversial term in the last few years. There are a lot of negative stereotypes associated with the word bisexual, and a lot of people view it as not being very inclusive, assuming that the bi is referring to the gender binary. Gender binary. Those who retain the label of bisexual will often argue that the bi in question is not the binary of male or female. It is those who are the same as me versus those who are different from me. That is inclusive of all genders. There are, of course, unfortunately in this world, some TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists, who do enjoy the exclusiveness of the term bisexual. Those people suck. So we're not going to talk about them anymore. The origins of the term bisexual were actually in gay conversion therapy, where bisexual was meant to mean both gay and straight. Some do prefer to use the word pansexual in place of bisexual as a means of being inclusive, of being attracted to people who identify as men, women, agender, non-binary, trans, etc. The T in LGBT, yep, we're on T, is trans. Wait, trans is It's not a sexual orientation, it's a gender identity. Yes. The acronym LGBTQIA+ does not exclusively describe sexual orientations, but is rather a grouping of a community of people who face the same sort of prejudice and barriers in society. However, there are trans people whose sexual preferences are to date other trans people. This is trans for trans, T for T. You may see it abbreviated. Q has two meanings. A few of these letters are double dipping. Q can stand for questioning or queer. Questioning is, as it sounds, you are questioning where you land in this alphabet. You may be unsure of the bounds of your sexual orientation, and that's totally normal. Sex and sexual orientation and identity evolves as we grow and learn and change, and a lot of people are questioning. I mean, we're all questioning, aren't we? To some degree. Maybe not our sexual orientation, but we're all questioning something. Just getting really existential for no reason. Anyway, Q is also for queer. Queer is another umbrella term. A lot of people use it to mean not straight. Queer is another one that has some controversy around it, as queer is a word that has been traditionally used as a slur, but was reclaimed in the 1980s by gay activists and is now very regularly used. You may notice some people flinch, especially older people flinch at the term queer, having been on the other side of it as a slur. But a lot of the younger generations are fully embracing it as a word that means anything outside of the sort of heteronormative understandings of sex and attraction. Where were we? LGBTQIA. I is for intersex. Yes, once again, not a sexual orientation, but a sex variation that also experiences a lot of similar barriers and prejudices. A is another double dipper, depending on who you're talking to, standing for either ally, as in someone who is not a member of the community, but who is supportive of the community, or asexual. Just a reminder that if your allyship is not intersectional, it is not true allyship. Asexuality, however, is a sexual orientation that encompasses another spectrum of people who experience various degrees of sexual attraction. Someone who is completely asexual does not experience sexual attraction. That doesn't mean they don't experience romantic attraction or do not want to be in a relationship, nor does it mean that they don't have sex. It just means that they don't experience those feelings of being sexually attracted to another person. This does not include people who have chosen celibacy, as in chosen not to engage in sexual activity, but still experience sexual attraction. But it does include orientations such as gray asexual or gray sexual, where people experience sexual attraction rarely but not never, or demisexuality, which means that you do experience sexual attraction, but it is not going to come until after you've already developed an emotional connection with a human being. You don't see a stranger and feel sexual attraction to them. Asexuality is a good example of the differences between sexual attraction and romantic attraction. For example, someone could be hetero-romantic but asexual, meaning they experience romantic feelings for the opposite sex, but they don't experience sexual attraction to anyone. This obviously doesn't just apply to asexuality. You can be homo-romantic and pansexual, for example, meaning you would only experience romantic feelings and develop romantic relationships with someone of the same gender, but you may be sexually attracted to people of all genders, and you may even engage in sexual relationships with people of all genders, but you're not forming the same sort of romantic attachments as you would to someone of the same gender. I was trying to keep this all very short and concise and to the point, but humans are so infinitely complex, and that's sexy. That's so sexy of us. This is just the very tip of the iceberg when it comes to sex and gender and expression and orientation and all of the politics and emotions and everything that's tied in language that's tied up in those elements of our identity. So please do let me know if there is something you have a question on, or an aspect that you think I should dive into further. Our bodies and our identities and our relationships and the way we interact with the world are what make us who we are. And anything we do or feel or want or love, as long as it's not hurting ourselves or hurting anyone else in the process, is just a totally natural expression of being a human. And if you have a problem with that, I will not tolerate any sort of hatred or bigotry or being just shitty in my comments. These aspects of humanity should not be controversial, but they are heavily politicized currently. And I am obviously all for open discussion and asking questions and having healthy conversations. That's the whole point of all of this, right? But anything hateful or nasty or just mean, you're getting blocked. And if you see me on here, I really should have put all of that at the beginning of the video, honestly, because the people who leave the shittiest comments generally don't get past the titles of videos. But anyway, if you have made it this far, thank you very much. You hold a very special place in my heart. You're my fave. If you do see me on here a little bit less, not that I didn't just come back from a very long break, I am back in school. The school is back in session. I will have some bigger videos coming up as related to schoolwork in the next 7 to 14 weeks as my classes go. But I will be attempting to supplement with some shorter videos like this. So please like and subscribe, and let me know if you watched this, so I feel a little less like I'm shouting into the void. Bye.